Call the member for Hinchinbrook.
Mr Speaker, I move amendments number 1 and number 2 circulated in my name. Mr Speaker, the amendments circulated in our name in behalf of the KAP is to introduce mandatory sentencing for recidivist youth offenders and recidivist offenders that have been caught and previously charged and convicted of unlawful use of a motor vehicle. This is around making sure those people out there that have been caught time and time again, once, then twice, third time, mandatory 12-month sentencing. And the reason for this is to send a clear message. Right now you've got kids out there remembering and reminding everybody, we've got kids out there actively stealing vehicles on a nightly basis and now chasing down police cop cars to ram them. These children and these people stealing these cars need to be sent a strong message. But it's not just about sending a strong message to these kids, but it's also adding a little bit of comfort for those people out there that believe there needs to be stronger legislation in this state. Real repercussions for these children and these people that are out there causing havoc on a nightly basis. And one of the reasons that we're calling for this 12 months minimum sentencing for these young offenders is because
Order, members.
It ties in directly with the KAP's policy to relocation sentencing. There's no use in locking these kids up for 12 more months if you're going to send them straight out to a place like Cleveland Bay Detention Centre or the 2 detention centres that have been proposed by the current state government. We can't do more of the same, Mr Speaker. We need a third option. That's why we want to send these children that would qualify as recidivist offenders that are having to do 12 months mandatory sentencing to a relocation site in the middle of Western Queensland, a remote location, so we can retrain these kids. You've got to get them off the drugs, Mr Speaker. You've got to get them cleaned up. You've got to get their nutrition right. And then you've got to try and reprogram them and give them some purpose. We just want to give these kids some purpose so when they've finished their time in a location like this, they can try and plug back into society. Give these kids an opportunity to become productive members of society instead of going straight back into the family unit, straight back into the friend cohorts that they are at the moment. You know what happens when it comes to dealing with children, Mr Speaker? Breaking them up and getting them away from the things they enjoy, the things they like doing. That's the first thing. That's the best punishment you can give one of these kids. You're sending a strong message to these recidivist young offenders that if you are convicted not once, twice, but 3 times, you're out. You're going to a relocation sentencing site, and this is the opportunity for magistrates to have a legal mechanism to do something meaningful when it comes to sentencing. 12 months gives that magistrate the opportunity to sentence these children without fear of being dragged back to the Court of Appeal and having it overturned, which is one of the most embarrassing things for magistrates. And that's the reason, that's the absolute reason why magistrates are being seen right now by the public of going soft on these young criminals, because they're scared, because there's not a mechanism like this for them to use as a lever.
Mr Speaker.
I call the member for Traeger.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Added to that contribution, there's a principle that we've mentioned in this debate through the KAP, but if I focus on Mount Isa, one of the answers that's been presented here is pouring more resources. So usually the thing is, let's not sentence them, or let's just keep them back in this and bolt some programs and supports around them. That seems to be the logic behind it, but the practicality of that is you don't have enough money or resources in the state to put enough resources to try and incentivise that kid, that recidivist offender, to try and rehabilitate them in any available programs in a place like Mount Isa. 1 car a night out there we're getting. That's just we don't need to go on and on about how bad the problem is, but for those people that really care for the kids without focusing and don't want to focus on the victims of this crime, if you just want to focus on the kids, I would argue this is the policy for them, because forcing them out of that situation into relocation sentencing, that different form of sentencing where you've got now the best attempt to try and engage those kids meaningfully in some rehabilitation program outside of that traditional youth detention centre. That's the best chance we believe you're going to have of rehabilitating them. But as I've had it said to me so many times in my office in Mount Isa, Rob, it's no good having these programs if you can't get the kids to turn up, and you've got to force them, and that's what the minimum, the mandatory sentencing is about. And I think is the contrast, in sharp contrast to the expansion of maximum sentencing, which I would argue is doing absolutely nothing. And so this is why it's there, and it really requires to be coupled with relocation sentencing, which we aren't able to put through as an amendment in this bill, which was our intention to couple with that. So it's not just the element of the mandatory sentencing alone, it's coupling it with a different form of sentencing that is just as important. But and technically we're not able to do that, and on the crossbench we don't have the numbers to get that amendment up. So that was our intention with this amendment, and I think it's the least of what we can do to address this terrible situation we've got. But again, I emphasise, from our point of view, from the KAP's position, this is as much about rehabilitating the kid as giving them a consequence. I think it does go as close to you can as killing two birds with one stone, is offering those victims of the crime a consequence to the offender, but also the offender might like it at first, but I think it's the best thing that could ever happen to them, because you're not going to bolt enough services around the problem we've got at the moment to be able to do that with that kid in that home unit in Mount Isa. That's the reality. I wish it wasn't, but it is, and I think you're kidding yourself if there was another way of doing it.
Mr Speaker,
I call the member for Hills.
Fully support the member for Hinchinbrook's amendment, minimum sentencing for unlawful use of a motor vehicle, and like what was brought to your attention here tonight and what we've seen all around Queensland, and there is a perception that rural and regional Queensland has been exempt, from when it comes to real crime. There's no way in the world that that is the case, and we've seen massive crime waves in Brisbane, Cairns, Townsville, all the major cities. But, Mr Speaker, we're starting to see this really take effect in small country towns. And we've seen not only cars stolen, burnt and burnt, but we're also seeing now businesses being broken into, and at the same time businesses burnt down. And as you look at it, Mr Speaker, there is, those figures that were brought up there before, that 90% of the people that go into, juveniles that go into the juvenile detention centres, one is that they're committing crime to get in there. The other side to it is they're also, within 12 months, they're out of there. So this coincides, like the member for Traeger was saying, coincides with our relocation sentencing policy, where these kids, actually, when they're out there, they're completely different when they're out in rural and western and outback Queensland. And it's all about putting them to work, Mr Speaker. Teach them values out there, teach them skills, teach them about the opportunities to make something of themselves, to be leaders, Mr Speaker, and leaders so that they can actually climb the ladder in life, but then they can be role models. They can be role models, Mr Speaker, and encourage others to do what they've actually done. Not steal, but become role models and leaders in the community. But you can't have it, if they're stealing cars, burning them, and we're patting them on the back and they're putting it up on social media and then telling everyone that this is a wonderful thing. We need a proper sentencing regime that is put in place, but a sentencing regime that works. And Mr Speaker, when I worked out there from Townsville to Mount Isa, but in those outback areas, Kajabi, all that area, while you're out there, it's a different world. It's therapeutic. It makes a difference. It changes a person. That's why you see a lot of people go on holidays out, in the Gulf of Carpentaria hidden away, because it changes them. And this is exactly what it'll do to those juvenile offenders. Juvenile offenders that keep committing these crimes. It'll change them, but at the same time they have the opportunities to work with all those different programs, build cattle troughs, muster, be involved with rural activities. So I fully support the member for Hinchinbrook's amendment and commend the amendment to the House and ask everyone to support it.
The question is that the member for Hinchinbrook's amendments numbers 1 and 2 be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Those against, no. I think the noes have it. The division has been called. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Close the bars. The question is that the member for Hinchinbrook's amendments numbers 1 and 2 be agreed to, for which a division has been called. Will the government whip advise what the government votes are for the ayes or noes?
48 noes, Speaker.
Will the opposition whip advise what the opposition votes are for the ayes or noes?
32 noes, Mr Speaker.
Will the clerk please report the votes of other parties and members?
Katter's Australian Party, 3 ayes. Queensland Greens, 2 noes. Pauline Hanson's One Nation, 1 aye. Independent member for Noosa, 1 aye.
Result of the division is ayes 5, noes 82. The question is resolved in the negative. The question is that Clause 8, as read, stand part of the bill. Those of that opinion say aye.